One of the most consequential pastors of our day, Rick Warren, has been the victim of a terrible and tragic occurrence that you would never believe. He founded Saddleback Church, one of the biggest megachurches in America, and is perhaps best known as the author of the well-selling book The Purpose-Driven Life. Nevertheless, are you aware that, hidden behind the pulpit, there is a deeply troubling detail, an incident that Rick has had to confront in private? So what exactly is this devastating news? But what happens when an influential leader, someone whose entire life has been devoted to assisting others, initializes a personal struggle? What transpires when the man who has lifted up countless others finds himself in need of encouragement? Be here while we discover the answer. The rise to international notoriety of Rick Warren. Did you know that Rick Warren was once a humble townie with lofty ambitions before he became a famous figure? It seems his formative years were jam-packed with adventures. His outlook on life was profoundly impacted by the numerous obstacles he faced, even as a young boy. Though he came into this world on January 28, 1954, in San Jose, California, Rick's family tree begins in a little hamlet in the United States. Ukiah, California, a sleepy little town encircled by nature, was his upbringing. The people lived in close proximity to one another, and life was easy. The family history includes a Baptist minister father, Jimmy, and a high school librarian mother, Warren. Envision yourself as a child living in a home where religion, education, and helping others were constants. Rick lived in that world. His dad had other callings besides preaching. As a talented carpenter, he found great joy in erecting churches, particularly in communities hit hard by natural disasters or economic hardship. Actually, Rick's heart was planted with a seed that would eventually blossom into something much greater than he could have ever imagined when he watched his dad help build churches across the nation, brick by brick, throughout his youth. Things begin to heat up from this point on. Rick, even when he was a little boy, wasn't like other kids. Leadership and religion captivated young Rick, who was otherwise engrossed in cartoons or sports. Even before most children had any idea what they intended to do with their lives, he began to read literature on leadership and theology. Everyone around Rick could see that he was destined for greatness by the time he was a teenager. At the tender age of 19, he experienced an intense call to enter the ministry as a pastor because the signs were so evident. While the specifics were a mystery to him, he was certain of one thing. There was a deep desire within him to honor God, along with assisting others in discovering their life's mission. While attending California Baptist University after graduating from high school, Rick's desire to make a difference in the world via ministry crystallized. And he wasn't only mentioning it. He had already begun to move. To hear the renowned pastor Wally Amos Criswell speak at the Jack Tar Hotel in San Francisco in November 1973, Rick and a companion forewent lessons and traveled 350 miles. Did you hear that something remarkable occurred when Warren waited to shake hands with Pastor Criswell afterwards? As they shook hands, Criswell apparently looked Rick in the eyes and said, "I feel led to lay my hands on you." Later, Rick returned the gesture. That further reaffirmed for Rick that he was heading in the correct direction and had great potential. When he was a college student, he started hosting Bible studies and other small meetings to bring people closer to God in a new and encouraging way. However, Rick had more in store. Beyond that, he desired more. Delving farther into theology was his decision. A Texas Baptist seminary, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, was his next stop for further education. He gained a solid grounding in leadership, church planting, and ministry at this time. A pivotal moment that would shape Rick's destiny occurred to him while he was a seminarian. The fastest-growing counties in the United States were mentioned in an article he came upon one day while perusing a magazine. The name of Orange County, California, stood out to him. He felt a sudden release of tension, as well as an indomitable urge to establish a church in that location. But the wild part is right here. He was short on funds, a physical location, and a congregation when that happened. He had complete faith in God and a dream. And you know what? I was satisfied. Rick and his wife Kay relocated to Orange County in 1980, right after Rick graduated from seminary. In the most surprising spot, they laid the groundwork for their church. In a living room. Yes, what you heard was true. There was merely a small gathering of folks in a modest home. There was no grand venue or stage. The bright side, though, is that little group expanded at a rate no one had anticipated. They had to relocate to a high school gym to accommodate the influx of new members who began appearing within a few weeks. That was the beginning of Saddleback Church's meteoric rise to prominence as one of the world's biggest and most consequential houses of worship. Rick Warren is now much more than a pastor. A guy whose faith-driven goal continues to inspire people all across the world. He is also a global leader and an author whose books have touched millions of lives. One would assume that Rick Warren, a man who has given his life for the church, would not have to endure hardships. However, that is not the case because Rick Warren has suffered terrible losses. Even though he practically single-handedly built one of the world's biggest and most powerful churches and was a pioneer in preaching the gospel of faith and hope. The most devastating loss for Rick Warren. In addition to his preaching, best-selling books, and prosperity, Rick Warren is a doting father of three. Yet he is also a father, and no parent should ever have to go through what he did. The devastating news of Rick Warren's son Matthew Warren's death stunned the globe in 2013. His unexpected death was shocking, but there was more to it than that. However, the tragic event had transpired in an incredibly tragic way. Of the three children born to Rick and Kay Warren, the youngest was Matthew, who came into this world in 1985. Even as a young child, he exhibited remarkable intelligence, kindness, and empathy. His parents never stopped mentioning how he had a kindness for the downtrodden. Matthew was always eager to lend a hand, whether it was to a lonely student or someone suffering from physical agony. Little did anyone know that beneath his compassionate exterior, he fought a terrible, unseen war. Matthew had a tough time dealing with mental health issues and severe depression from a young age. His kind and loving parents saw that he was secretly bearing a huge load. It was obvious that Matthew was coping with more than simply melancholy by the time he was a teenager. Rick and Kay did all in their power to alleviate this terrible conflict, which persisted for decades. The two of them prayed. In addition to providing all the love and support they could muster, they sought out the top doctors. But it's not always that easy, as anybody who has struggled with mental illness can tell you. Rick has always maintained that matters of spirituality and mental health are interconnected. The belief in God does not, in Rick's view, make one immune to depression. Additionally, a person's love for God should not be diminished simply because they experience despair. Although he loved Jesus with all his heart, Matthew had a genuine struggle. Matthew Warren unfortunately passed away on April 5, 2013, at the young age of 27, as a result of his battles with mental health. Everyone in the Christian community, including the Warren family, was in mourning after this terrible tragedy, which rocked the family to its very foundation. No words can express the anguished grief we feel right now, Rick and Kay Warren stated in a message to their congregation. The smallest of our sons, Matthew, was a wonderful young man, very sensitive, empathetic, and kind. He could make people laugh and had a sharp mind. But mental disease, pits of despair, and dismal thoughts plagued him from the day he was born. Their family was not the only ones who suffered greatly by Matthew's death. As a result, people all throughout the world, including in churches, have begun to communicate more openly and compassionately about faith and mental health. There is no relief from the anguish of losing a child. However, Rick and Kay Warren courageously chose to channel their sorrow into service to others, rather than allowing themselves to be consumed by grief. The Hope for Mental Health initiative was founded at Saddleback Church less than a year after Matthew's passing. They had a clarified objective. In times of difficulty, no one should ever have to face it alone. When it comes to mental health, no one should ever feel embarrassed. And no family has to go through pain alone. They began to discuss their loss openly. Faith and mental health are interrelated, according to Rick Warren's messages. While most people shrugged off discussions of mental health, Kay Warren became an outspoken champion for the cause, particularly in religious institutions. Rick had preached extensively on the importance of having a purpose in life, finding joy in the midst of adversity, and the importance of having hope for the future. Thus, his family was understandably bombarded with inquiries from both the general public and Christians over his son's death. Many people questioned Rick's religion and expressed surprise that his kid had ignored the sermons. Some even said that his faith was powerless to save his own child. People always wonder, why didn't God heal Matthew? This is one of the most impactful things Rick has stated regarding this tragedy. I assure them that God did indeed heal him, but it will take all eternity. It was a powerful reminder that a person's faith is not defined by their mental health difficulties, and it reached millions of people. It served as a gentle reminder that reaching out for assistance is never a sign of weakness, and that the church can and should provide a welcoming space for individuals with mental health challenges. More than 10,000 members of the church community reached out to Rick through his message service, sharing their own experiences with mental health issues. And true to form for Rick Warren, he has continued to find meaning in his suffering. The more he spoke out about mental health, both within and outside of Saddleback Church, the more congregations began to do the same. From the pulpit, more and more pastors are addressing the issue of depression. Additionally, a greater number of individuals have sought assistance, sans embarrassment or dread. Rick expressed his joy in an interview at the fact that other churches see his church as an example of how to handle difficult topics like mental health. He explained that their aim is to open the door so that churches will follow suit, reasoning that if the diocese and Saddleback are doing it, then we can do it too. We would be thrilled if a movement could be initiated where individuals start to express the desire for this element to be incorporated into their local ministry. Amy Warren, Rick's daughter, was the one who broke the silence on the profound impact her brother's illness and death had on the Warren family. Suddenly, everyone saw past Rick Warren's charismatic lectures and infectious grins to the true struggles he and his family were facing. Amy detailed how her own undetected chronic Lyme disease worsened at the same time that Matthew's sickness was getting worse. According to her, we should prepare to bunker down, cling to one another, and pray if we want to survive. Another wave of terrible news has apparently just hit Rick Warren, this time concerning his health. Warren's conflicts and criticisms. Rick Warren has remained controversial despite his enormous influence and success. From his theology and strategy for church expansion to his stances on social and political problems, he has taken a lot of heat over the years. A common point of contention for Rick has been his approach to expanding his church. Picture yourself as a member of a church that, out of the blue, reinvents itself with new programs, worship styles, and a vision for the future. Not everyone is comfortable with change, particularly rapid change. So although this may be thrilling for some, it's disturbing for others. Allow me to explain. Worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and mission are the 5 pillars upon which Rick Warren's purpose-driven paradigm rests, and they are essential to the growth of churches. While this strategy inspired many, it sparked heated debates in certain churches and generated interest beyond the Christian community and the mainstream media. Some congregations reportedly separated or had disputes about these adjustments in 2006, as the Wall Street Journal stated that it became that contentious and convoluted. Rick eventually admitted these difficulties in an effort to defuse the controversy, stressing that he supported encouraging church development and adaptation, but did not genuinely back attempts to eject members who disagreed with the policy. Since Rick Warren became the focus of a nationwide controversy in December 2008, the situation is already contentious. The whole scandal started when many were taken aback by President-elect Barack Obama's unexpected invitation to Rick to give the invocation at his inauguration. Why did Obama pick Rick, who clearly didn't share his views? Compounding matters was the fact that Warren had publicly backed Proposition 8, a law in California that defined marriage as between a man and a woman. Advocates for the LGBTQ community, in particular, accused her of inciting hate speech due to this position. They were worried that Rick's beliefs didn't mesh with the welcoming platform of the new government. But President Obama explained his decision by saying that different viewpoints need to be heard. In addition, Obama brought up the fact that he had received an invitation to speak at Saddleback despite his conflicting opinions on homosexual individuals. He expressed his desire to promote peaceful dialogue by allowing Warren to speak. Rick Warren was also embroiled in yet another scandal. When he started promising to do more to encourage conversations between religions, his 2006 journey to Syria included a meeting with Bashar al-Assad, the country's president. Some critics and church leaders were not pleased by this decision either. The wisdom of collaborating with a government notorious for human rights abuses was put to Rick's test. But he made it clear that he wasn't endorsing any political position. Rather, he was trying to promote peace and understanding. It gets worse. Warren went to Islamic gatherings in 2009 and 2012, pushing for Christian and Muslim cooperation to solve world problems. Of course, there were evangelical leaders who voiced their concerns that these efforts could lead to a fuzziness in theological boundaries. Warren, as you might expect, made it plain that he wanted to make friends and collaborate on humanitarian projects as his response. Rick Warren's church, Saddleback, has been the target of criticism and controversy in addition to his own personal problems. When Saddleback Church proceeded to ordain 3 women as pastors in 2021, it made news. This change was highly contentious since it ran against the long-held view of the Southern Baptist Convention, which holds that males should only serve in pastoral positions. There was a lot of debate around the ordination. The Southern Baptist Convention started looking into whether Saddleback agreed with its theological views because of this. By February 2023, the Saddleback Church had been kicked out of the fellowship for what was mainly seen as their habit of employing women in pastoral roles, such as Stacy Wood, who was married to Andy Wood, the new lead pastor, and serving as a teaching pastor. The convention affirmed the expulsion, despite Saddleback's appeal. Even after being kicked out, Saddleback first said it wanted to stay in the California Southern Baptist Convention. In October 2023, however, The church made the decision to withdraw from the state convention as well, in an effort to avoid additional discord within the Baptist community as a whole. There's more. Spiritual emptiness, self-serving leadership, poverty, disease, and illiteracy were the 5 major issues that Rick and Kay Warren sought to address in their 2003 peace plan, a worldwide campaign. The ambitious ambitions of the strategy were both praised and criticized. The effort was criticized by some who thought it was insensitive to different cultures and tried to force Western principles on many different groups. Furthermore, unexpected reservations regarding the plan's initiative's efficacy and longevity were voiced. Health issues facing Rick Warren during his retirement years. For over 4 decades, Rick Warren devoted himself to serving God. He expanded Saddleback Church from a private Bible study into one of the biggest and most prominent churches in America. Through his writings and humanitarian work, he touched the lives of millions of people all over the globe. On the other hand, most people were unaware that a terrible event was occurring behind the scenes. Some major health issues began for Rick in 2021. It was unclear what was wrong first. He suffered from severe insomnia, chronic pain, and muscular spasms. His capacity to carry out daily tasks grew impaired as the symptoms worsened. Envision yourself attempting to oversee a massive ministry while your body is continually opposing you. Doctors diagnosed Rick Warren with spinal myoclonus after a battery of tests failed to reveal any other possible causes of his symptoms. You won't hear much about spinal myoclonus, I promise. Involuntary muscular spasms are caused by a rare neurological condition. These twitches are more than that. They make even the smallest of chores more difficult because they are unpredictable and can be rather uncomfortable. Not only were the spasms the toughest part for Rick, the fact that his illness prevented him from getting a good night's rest was the deciding factor. Day after day, he would go nearly without sleep, leaving him weary, drained, and unable to concentrate. This was catastrophic for a guy whose whole existence was devoted to writing, preaching, and leadership. His already challenging medical situation was exacerbated by the fact that he suffered from an incredibly unusual and unidentified brain illness, which his physicians had dubbed the Warren syndrome. Rick claims that his body's incapacity to metabolize adrenaline is the root cause of his illness. According to him, his brain moves at a rapid pace, and he also experiences tremors, disorientation, and discomfort as symptoms of this disease. Another serious health issue soon awaited Rick Warren, as if spinal myoclonus weren't bad enough. His diagnosis of an autoimmune illness was made public in 2022. Because they trigger an immune response that targets healthy cells, autoimmune disorders are notoriously difficult to treat. Rick experiences round-the-clock agony in all of his main muscles due to his condition. Everything was so painful, he said, that even the most basic tasks became more of a struggle than they had been previously. As time went on, Rick had to confront the devastating truth that he couldn't continue leading Saddleback Church the way he wanted to due to his health. The individuals he served, his staff, and his church were all important to him. Yet, he was well aware that his condition would deteriorate more unless he took it easy. Thus, Rick Warren made a monumental announcement in June of 2021. His position as senior pastor at Saddleback Church was coming to an end. This news caught a lot of people off guard. After all, he had spent his whole life constructing this church and was still deeply committed to its purpose. This wasn't about surrendering, though, for Rick. It centered on wisdom. He took over as head of the Mission Coalition, finishing the task in January 2022. Warren continued to serve as founding pastor even after stepping down as head pastor in August of that year. No one, not his religion, nor his family, and not even himself, would benefit from his excessive exertion, he knew. Rick Warren did not totally abandon ministry when he resigned as senior pastor. He continued to do what brought him joy despite the fact that his health required him to take it easy. Rick began to concentrate on worldwide ministry work, assist in the training of new leaders, and continue to share his message through speaking and writing when he stopped preaching every Sunday at Saddleback. His wife, Kay Warren, carried on their husband's work to raise awareness about mental health issues and provide assistance to families going through difficult times. Rick had a lot of work and a major adjustment to deal with this. Rick had been the head of the church, the one to make all the important choices, and the one to deliver the stirring sermons week after week for decades. The truth is that trusting other people to continue the vision was one of the most difficult things he has ever had to do. However, we learned that things may change for the better in an instant. You may be asking how the Christian community as a whole and Saddleback Church members responded to this stunning news. Hearing Rick deliver those words, announcing his departure from the pulpit, was difficult, even though he had always been forthright about his troubles, from personal grief to his recent health issues. It felt like the scene from the movie when Harry met Sally and told his kids he was selling the family business. Along with my beloved father-in-law and many other church friends who have passed on to heaven, you have a rational understanding of the decision, but it's hard for you to accept it emotionally. Some felt as though they had lost a spiritual guide as a result. For some, it served as a somber reminder that times change. Rick Warren has spent years preparing for the day when someone else would take over by mentoring emerging leaders. That's the good news. Finally, that time has come. Andy Wood, a pastor from Northern California, was identified by Rick as the man who will succeed him and lead Saddleback Church into its next phase in his announcement. Some people felt relief at this. Rick, on the other hand, had a strategy before he left the chapel. Yet for some, it was a profound change in how they felt. Imagining a beloved educator leaving the classroom and being replaced by someone else is a good analogy. The new hire is competent, but you can't see anybody else in that position. People wanted to know if Andy would deliver the same sermons. How would the congregation react? Although most were prepared to welcome the change, a few people had trouble adjusting to the prospect of a new leader. It was Rick Warren who christened their children, helped them through difficult times, and said words that seemed to have come directly from God's heart. He wasn't merely a preacher, after all. It was nearly hard for Saddleback regulars who had been there from the start to fathom Sundays without him performing. We all know that change isn't easy, no matter how important it is. Concern for Saddleback's long-term viability was also voiced by a few members. Is the church's vision going to remain unchanged? Will it still have that familiar feel? These weren't trivial matters. A lot of people felt lost without the leader who had formed their church family, as it was the only one they had ever known. One thing, though, was crystal evident to everyone. Even in the midst of all the feelings, doubts, and dispute, there was no movement at Saddleback Church. However, Rick and Saddleback have faced more than just retirement and health problems in the past. In reality, the church and its pastor, Rick Warren, have both been the target of startling scandals that have damaged their public reputations. Despite Rick Warren's struggles, his influence on the church cannot be denied. Do you have any opinions? Is this the beginning of a new chapter in his story, or will he be able to overcome this challenge? Post a comment and tell us. Also, hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, and enable notifications if you enjoyed this video. This way you will always be up to date.